Prospector News is media for educational purposes only and should not be construed as advice. We are not a certified financial analyst, licensed broker, or fund dealer, exempt market dealer, or hold a license to provide financial advice. We provide no legal opinion regarding accounting, tax, or law issues. Nothing in this podcast should be construed as investment advice or the solicitation to buy or sell stocks or commodities. All opinions expressed are those of the participants and should not be relied upon when making investment decisions. Those decisions should be made with the advice of a personal financial advisor. If you have enjoyed our podcast, please hit the like and share buttons and be sure to hit subscribe. I'm Michael Fox, and this is the Prospector News Podcast. Joining me today, I have an interesting and very special guest. He is the president of the Uranium Producers of America, Scott Melbye. Welcome to the show.
Michael, it's a pleasure, and it's been great to catch up with you a couple times in Chicago and more recently at PDAC.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always good to talk with you because as the head of that particular lobbying group, you have your fingers on the pulse of what government is actually thinking as far as energy policy going forward. Now, I understand you were in hearings in the last week over in Washington in both houses. Is there anything you can share about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole nuclear energy industry and the uranium industry in the United States and Canada, for that matter, really that figure prominently top of mind for everyone in the House and Senate, White House, Department of Energy. The whole issue of energy independence and energy security has really come to light. And it's really a combination of two things. It's the mega trend towards green energy and decarbonization, and frankly, some of the spectacular failures that have been experienced due to a more ideological approach to energy policy as opposed to a more math and science approach to sensible energy policy. But then the invasion of Russia's really appalling invasion of Ukraine has really put uranium supplies from that part of the world in jeopardy. And so our meetings in DC were on a number of topics. One was the potential for a uranium ban from Russia. There's bills circulating in the House and Senate, some immediate bans, some more gradual over 3 years. We also met with the White House, National Security Council, who were more concerned about an embargo coming the other way from Putin, given the vulnerability that we have. 60% of our uranium in the United States comes from Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. 20% of the uranium enrichment we're reliant there. So we never thought, as the American uranium industry, we never thought that that was a good idea. And it's really come to light now. And at any rate, I think you're seeing utilities focus more on jurisdictions, safe jurisdictions, moving away from Russia. That really benefits uranium producers in Canada and the United States. I would include Australia in that. I would include Africa, but there you have to keep in mind that China is taking such a leading role in that part of the world. And whether or not they invade Ukraine, we have China as a big competitor for resources globally. So we were getting a very warm reception in DC. Both Democrats and Republicans really get the nuclear energy story these days. They want carbon-free energy, but wind and solar only run 30% of the time, while as nuclear is 95% available base load energy with no carbon emissions. So it's exciting times. I honestly would say that in my close to 40 years of doing this, is probably the most exciting time that I've experienced for the uranium fundamentals and some of these geopolitical and mega trends.
Yeah, I guess you've seen the pendulum swing both ways, all the way from everybody wants to shut down the nuclear reactors to we can't fire them up again fast enough.
It's so true. And, I think I've lived long enough to be loved by Democrats and Republicans in the United States, which is kind of an unusual position to be in, but it's also a position that we really have to take advantage of, and the industry needs to step up. And so initiatives like the announcement by the Secretary of Energy 2 weeks ago that they want to direct $4 billion to the domestic American fuel cycle for nuclear power. That would be uranium conversion enrichment, to really revitalize our industry and move away from Russia as quickly as we can. Now, that's kind of a follow-on to the uranium strategic reserve that was announced also last week. It's small amount. They're buying 1 million pounds in the first tranche and the associated conversion services. But, that in a standalone basis won't change things much. But if that's the first year of a multi-year commitment to buy domestic uranium, we're very excited. So we see it as a positive step. But very good news out of DC, and certainly the growth in nuclear power, small modular advanced reactors are really getting a lot of attention, and folks want to see, especially in areas where they're forced to move away from coal-fired power generation, the replacement with a small modular advanced reactor like we're seeing in the state of Wyoming really seems to tick a lot of the boxes, again, in a bipartisan way. So lots of opportunity across the board for nuclear and uranium these days.
Yeah, now, one of the challenges that I've always seen is that people hear nuclear power plants and they picture their grandfather's nuclear power plant of the 1970s. The safety and the viability of these plants has improved dramatically over the decades, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to improve on what has already been a safe industry. If we look at just the sober facts of injuries or deaths from nuclear energy compared to all other forms of energy, we're comparable to wind and solar, and perhaps the most safest industry over the last 50 years, given all the trillions of megawatts produced over that time. But you're right, every generation of reactors just improves the safety, the monitoring, the operational controls, and these advanced and small modular reactors really take that to another level. So I think we'll see broad acceptance. You're seeing it in Canada. The first SMR there will go in, I believe, at Darlington with, I think it's GE Hitachi unit next to the big Darlington units there. So, you're still seeing large reactors. We've seen, close to 60 reactors added to the grid over the last 8 years, and 55 more being built. And those are large reactors in countries that need big baseload power and need it produced cleanly. So the SMRs are kind of a new market and additional demand for uranium that really isn't fully factored in yet. So more markets for our uranium is a good thing.
Now, will the SMRs, will they eventually replace the larger reactors, or is it one of those situations where they're kind of part and parcel to the bigger picture?
Well, they can. I think in the United States, the next wave of reactors in the US are these small modular reactors, because they're built in factory, they're shipped on site, there's lower upfront capital cost. They can be integrated into grids that are heavily reliant on wind and solar, because they can be more of a load following operator as opposed to big baseload power. And so it's not inconceivable to see on sites of decommissioned reactors that may have been built in the 60s or 70s that they'll use those sites to build the SMRs. And that's generally good news for the communities, because we always hear not in my backyard is an issue for nuclear. Well, actually, it's not really true, because those folks that have nuclear power plants in their communities overwhelmingly support them. So if they can see continued operations, albeit with smaller reactors, but they're scalable too. They may be 100 megawatts versus 1,600 megawatts for a big reactor, but you can build 10, 12 of them in sequence to ramp up to meet your energy demand.
And there's a cost benefit of doing that, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's especially now with natural gas prices where they're at, these are becoming increasingly more competitive, and there is an economies of scale argument. The first units first of a kind units are typically seeing support from U.S. governments, Canadian governments, UK, obviously China and Russia are supporting their industries. So the first units will get some assistance, but with each plant that's built, I think you get broader acceptance. There's a lot of customers for the second and third of a kind of each one of these designs. And I think eventually hundreds, if not thousands of these will be built around the world. So certainly the factory built approach is going to be cheaper than building big facilities. I think the analogy I heard recently that was really made sense to me is the big reactors are like building an airport, a massive infrastructure project. The small modular reactors are like building airplanes. So obviously you can see the advantages of building these smaller units.
Yeah, most definitely. Now, just to put my environmental hat on for just a second, because most environmentalists want everything green. They want it done like 10 years ago. What is the realistic time frame for the United States and, say, Canada to replace their coal and natural gas and oil-fired power plants with nuclear?
Well, this is the push now. You know, we're seeing a lot of interest in these SMRs in Western United States, where we are. I'm located out of Colorado, and here we're probably about 50% reliant on coal from the Powder River Basin of Wyoming. If we phase out that coal in a way that we don't have adequate replacements, you know, we can't just say it's going to be wind and solar. That doesn't work. It's you know, we need to deal with when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. And so there is a lot of interest in places like Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, Washington State. So the plans for some of these first units, like the one that's proposed in Wyoming, that's a TerraPower Natrium reactor. Interesting, it's designed and built by Bill Gates' company, and the first buyer is Warren Buffett's Pacific Corp, the power company in Wyoming. So the plan there is to have that operational in the second half of this decade, so before 2030. And we're now scrambling to make sure that the fuel cycle is up and running. It uses, these units use high assay low enriched uranium. So it's a type of fuel that we're not presently equipped in the US to produce. Russia is. So that's another driver back in DC, is to make sure that this infrastructure for these new fuel types can be up and running to not delay the startup. And I think in Darlington, in Ontario, I think it may be 2028 that is the startup target date there. So these aren't, you know, the concept cars you see at the auto show anymore. They're actually being proposed, ordered, and built. So very exciting times. And you know, in the next decade, I wouldn't be surprised to see hundreds of these, if not, you know, close to 1,000 of these built and ordered over the next decade.
Okay. And where does the uranium come from for those? Like, is there enough in Canada and the United States to power all these new reactors?
There's enough in the ground, but as you know, we've gone through a period where you know, the supply and demand fundamentals following Fukushima initially caused overproduction in the early part of that 10-year period. And then, you know, really from 2017 on, we've been producing at a huge gap to the current requirements. If the world uses 200 million pounds of uranium annually to run reactors, we've been producing in, you know, the 130, 140 million pound level. So a 60, 70 million pound a year gap, as it is, just, you know, in the current status quo. That's had a huge impact on drawing down inventories and reducing the overhang, and what we say is rebalancing the market. We're just about at that point, just on the supply and demand fundamentals. Forget about SMRs or Russia, Ukraine. And then Sprott Physical Uranium Trust comes in and has now to date bought close to 55 million pounds of uranium off the market. That's not a catalyst in the market, but it is a tipping point. It did cause this rebalancing to perhaps advance by a couple of years. Would have happened eventually, but they happened, you know, they made it happen in a hurry. So now we find ourselves in a time where we need new mine production, but the incentives haven't been there. And permitting and lead times, whether it's in Canada, United States, or anywhere else, it's not a flick a switch. It you know, could be 5 to 10 years to license, permit, and build a new mine. So we really are facing in the second half of this decade a real supply crunch. So that's where my two companies factor in. Uranium Energy Corp, you know, has production platforms now in 2 states, Wyoming and Texas, in advanced, fully licensed and operational stages. So, you know, producers like ourselves that can restart operations quite quickly have an advantage. You also have developers that are fully permitted and don't have to go through that regulatory process. It's more commercial decision to restart, have an advantage. But just in rough terms, we probably need 8 to 10 new mines coming on. That's even with Cameco producing at full capacity in Saskatchewan, and assuming the Kazakhs are producing at their full licensed capacity. But I'm not sure. There's a lot of questions on whether we will get Kazakh uranium given their proximity and involvement with Russia on a banking, transportation, geographically, geopolitically, being so aligned with Russia. I don't know if we can count on all that uranium coming in from Kazakhstan, but even if it does come in, we need 8 to 10 new mines. That's going to favor these better mines and developers in, like I said, Australia, Canada, the United States, Africa, and I think the real premium goes to those developers and producers that aren't controlled by Russia, aren't controlled by China. I think Western utilities, whether they're in Europe, Central Europe, Western Europe, or North America, are now really rethinking the way they bought uranium. In an oversupplied market, you don't really care where the uranium's coming from. You're buying from traders, you're buying in the spot market or carry trades, and you're not really thinking about the mines and the resources and the teams and all the geopolitical risks that you normally consider. That's back in vogue now, and that's what utilities are focused, and they are coming back, and they are contracting again with producers and building back up their long-term portfolios. And so, as I said, Canada and the U.S. I think are the best jurisdictions to be in, and that's why we've really focused our activities there.
Yeah, well, let's get you to change your hat here for just a quick second. You're also the executive vice president of Uranium Energy Corporation, and you had the big buyout at the PDAC this year. You bought a Canadian developer, UEX. So if I understood what you just said, one of the main reasons for that purchase would have been the fact that we're going to need new uranium supply in North America within the next decade, and UEX was a close to production kind of operation that fit in well with UEC. Am I going down the right?
Close. I mean, we see UEX having interest in some of the best projects in the Athabasca Basin that I would term those as medium to long-term developments. What we get in the near term was from the acquisition of Uranium One at the end of last year, which doubled our productive capacity in 3 areas. The actual processing capacity in Texas and Wyoming now, the permitted well fields that we can draw from, and the overall resources in the ground. UEX represents another doubling of those resources in what we think is the best jurisdiction in the world is Saskatchewan. And so the pro forma UEC with the UEX assets in, to be able to say that we're focused in Texas, Wyoming, and Saskatchewan is very exciting. And we think what we propose is a very creative transaction, a win-win for both sides, a very generous but fair premium to the UEX shareholders. I don't think they were getting their assets fully valued in the standalone company. They're now part of a $1 billion company that trades 15 million shares a day on the New York Stock Exchange and has big plans to be a major, first-tier producer in the future, not just a small junior American uranium company. We want to be a major global player in the uranium space, and UEX gives us access to some of the best deposits with some of the best management teams in the world. I mean, one of the things that appeals to us is we don't have to operate those projects. We have the best operators in the world in Orano, Cameco, and Denison that manage the projects, and we have those minority interests. So it really expands our footprint without detracting from our focus to really get Texas and Wyoming restarted as quickly as we can going forward.
Oh, excellent. Now, with a foot in each country, do you find that there's appropriate coordination going back and forth between the American and Canadian officials to make sure that the demand for uranium is going to be met in our backyards, so to speak?
Yeah, well, I as much as I am the head of the Uranium Producers of America, and I've been really pitching for the US production industry my whole career and continue to, I think we have to include Canada in that mix. As a close ally, geographically connected the way we are, I think there's strong interest on both sides of the border to ensure that our industries in Canada, particularly in Saskatchewan, really thrive. And we're seeing that in the United States. I mean, some states are better to be producing in than others. We've chosen Texas and Wyoming for good reason. That's very resource friendly. We don't have Aboriginal land issues or sort of national park issues that might hold us back. We have full support for our operations in those states. And having been with Cameco for many years, over 23 years, I know how important Saskatchewan, the uranium industry is to Saskatchewan and Canada. So I think we see a bright future for the uranium industry in Canada as well.
That's good news. Now, let's go overseas. Europe and Germany, they're getting pummeled, for lack of a better way of looking at it, with their energy policy, given what's happened with the Russian-Ukraine conflict. They had shut down in Germany their reactors in favor of other things, and that seems to be coming back on them to bite them in the behind. What's going to happen there?
Yeah, it's been a spectacular failure, frankly. And, that really started 10, 15 years ago when Germany wanted to decarbonize their energy sector, but at the same time move away from nuclear power, which was their largest source of carbon-free energy. It was kind of doomed from the start, and we always felt we'd be able to say, I told you so, but it's happening, and we're not getting any joy from being able to say it now. But it does stand as an excellent example to other countries, other jurisdictions, that if you do this green energy policy poorly, and rely on ideology and kind of passion for this without the math and science backing it up, you're going to be Germany, which has spent hundreds of billions of euros on renewable energy, has shutting all but 3 of the nuclear plants down, and it's only resulted in electricity prices 50% higher than neighboring France. It's resulted in a reliance on Russian natural gas, which has really compromised them in the whole discussion around Russia-Ukraine, and they haven't been the most reliable ally in fighting the Russians in this issue because of that reliance. They're coming around to it now. And then, what's ironic is this was all kind of predicated on reducing carbon emissions, which they've really not met, and they're not going to meet their decarbonization goals by 2030 and beyond. So, I think greener energy, cleaner energy is a good aspiration, and we should embrace it. But we've got to do it with a heavy dose of math and science behind it. That favors nuclear energy. I've just returned from trips to Poland, Czech Republic, discussions in Romania as well, where they're all being forced to move away, like my home state in Colorado, where we're heavily coal reliant. So are the Central European nations, and they're being forced to move away that to become, more integral part of the European Union. But at the same time, they can't rush in the arms of Russia and rely on natural gas. So really, it leaves nuclear as the key focus. And it's not surprising that outside of Asia, I think Central Europe is the fastest growing and most appealing, attractive market for nuclear power today. And that's both large reactors that are being proposed in a number of countries in that region. Also the small modular reactors in Poland. You even have a large copper company that is engaging with NuScale out of the United States to build small modular reactor to produce reliable 24/7 electricity, to also give their copper production the green stamp, if you will. So you have that, and then you also have the shift which impacts uranium demand. You have a lot of Russian-built, Russian-designed reactors in those countries where they're making a concerted effort to move away from fuel supplies. And that means the fabricated fuel. And that's not easy. That's a big commitment for the fuel fabricators to make the Russian-designed fuel and move them away from Moscow. Westinghouse in Sweden and in Spain have said that they can step up and meet the needs of all those Russian-designed reactors. Well, what that means for Western uranium suppliers is the uranium and conversion enrichment will no longer come from Russia, it will come from the West. So I think as a North American supplier, I'm probably as likely to make a sale of uranium to Central European countries these days going forward as we can in the United States. So that's another exciting market for us.
Now, where are the reactors being built? I remember growing up, there was always talk about how great the Canadian CANDU reactors were. Is Canada still a major supplier?
The Canadian CANDU reactors have been, I think, in the history of their operations, have been some of the highest performing reactors in the world. So they continue to be great energy assets. You know, particularly in Ontario, you see the story there. Talk about a carbon-free energy policy, but without the expense of reliable electricity. That it's really been a success story. The small modular reactors, some of them are also being developed, at Chalk River in cooperation in Canada, a lot of the research there. So, Canada will see the growth. Whether new CANDUs are built will remain to be seen, but the existing ones are all being refurbished and extending their lifetimes, and then supplementing with the SMRs in the near term. So, Canada, I think, is doing the right thing. And Ontario being the leader there.
I see. And where else are reactors being built then that would supply these Eastern European countries other than Russian reactors?
Yeah, well, I mean, the big growth is in Asia. Certainly China is the fastest growing market. But you're seeing, in Europe now too, where the UK is committed to replacing sort of their older generation nuclear reactors with new reactors, both big and small. Small reactors in the UK are intended to come from Rolls-Royce, who are gearing up their operations to build those SMRs in the UK and elsewhere. Central Europe, you've got Czech Republic, just returned from a trade mission there, US trade mission. And they are, I believe they've reached out to reactor manufacturers in Korea, France, and the United States to propose a large reactor build there. And interesting that they excluded China and Russia in that tender. Romania canceled a big Chinese reactor build plan in favor of NuScale again out of the US and looking to other alternatives to expand their CANDU reactors in Romania. So it's time for the Western industries to step up, because we do know that Russia and China, these are national initiatives. They tend to also feed into geopolitical goals, which is part of the problem. Is when Russia sells a reactor to, say, a place like Turkey, they're entering into an 80-year relationship with that country that, in the past would have been Westinghouse or GE or even the CANDU reactors in certain countries. So if we want to kind of lose our seat at the table geopolitically in a lot of these countries, we need to get not only our domestic build of reactors, but also be effective on the export markets. And I see that happening. And so it's very encouraging as a Western supplier.
And that's interesting to note, because people tend to be very myopic when they hear about how it's a critical, element for the American economy. They don't think geopolitically; they just think, powering our own backyard.
Yeah, no, it's a very big issue in DC, where it's hard for us to be at the seat of the table in a lot of these countries around the world if we're not stepping up, and providing them nuclear technologies. And certainly the Chinese and in their Belt and Road initiatives, it goes beyond energy. It's ports, roads, financing, and debt restructuring for a lot of these countries. So they kind of get them hooked, and then they're in. And the best examples are in Africa, where the country of Namibia, all the uranium projects, or most of the uranium, all the existing mines are owned by the Chinese. And a lot of the future developments may likely be controlled there as well. So we have to step up internationally. And, if we are going to move to a post-Russia world in terms of nuclear fuel supplies and reactor supplies, then Western industries need to step up. And that is a big focus not just on the uranium mines, but the uranium conversion and the uranium enrichment that needs to ramp up here in the United States in particular. So not surprised the Department of Energy here wants $4 billion directed to fast track that and get these facilities up and running.
So beyond that $4 billion, what else does government need to do to step up the industry?
Yeah, I think a big thing, and this is specific to uranium mining, and it doesn't have to be just uranium. I could be talking about lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper. The left, the political left, loves the green energy economy, is now warming to nuclear power, loves electric vehicles, the shift to all electric vehicles. But then when we talk about the minerals that need to be mined to support the green energy economy, they're not always as supportive. So it's a very very big disconnect there, that we want all the things that the green energy economy provides, but we don't want to mine the minerals to do that, despite the fact that, in the United States and Canada, we have the highest regulatory standards, health, safety, environment. We're the envy of the world in terms of that. And if we don't want it, here, well, then we push it off to countries like Uzbekistan or Congo or wherever, where it might not be to the high standards. So we still have work to do. The way that governments tend to inhibit that growth is through regulations. We saw during the Trump administration a lot of not abandoning regulations. We are industries that need to be regulated, just like air travel or anything else that has safety issues associated with it. We need to be regulated, but we need to be regulated fairly and with a real public interest involved in balancing those interests. And so, the Biden administration kind of put back in place a lot of those regulations and restrictions. The Supreme Court last week struck down some of that overreach. So again, it's great that we're embracing the green energy economy, but there needs to be mined minerals, even beyond uranium. Copper is a good one. A lot of copper in an electric vehicle, yet projects in places like Arizona are being opposed. So we do still have some work to do, but we're encouraged that the narrative is turned positive on all these fronts.
Yeah, I've always said that we as an industry have always been kind of poor communicators when it comes to letting people know how important it is for their daily lives, that, without mining, a lot of the stuff that they take for granted just simply doesn't exist.
Yep, I totally agree.
Wonderful. Well, as we keep going forward, what's the next round of talks with the U.S. government? When does those occur?
Yeah, so our focus now is we're waiting for the Department of Energy to not just give an aspirational budget request for $4 billion without any details. The appropriators won't go for that. They want to see a detailed plan of how much of that goes to uranium, how much to conversion, how much to enrichment. Are we promoting multiple types of enrichment technologies? And just, how is that money being spent? And so that is something to really keep an eye out for in the coming weeks, to see the detailed plans that the Department of Energy has promised us that is imminent. And so we'll see that. It's important that the Strategic Uranium Reserve, will now be seeing bids received and uranium purchased shortly from domestic miners, but we need it to be multi-year. So we're going to continue our work continues to ensure that it's a multi-year and fully funded, not partially funded like it is in 2022.
Wonderful. As those plans get rolled out, we'll make sure we have you back on to provide comment and talk about how the industry itself is moving forward. Absolutely.
No, it's good. Well, I appreciate being with you today, Michael. It's exciting time. If you're a uranium investor, you've had to show a lot of perseverance and patience, but I think the long wait is coming to an end here. There's just so many fundamentals that are coming together to really point to a positive future here for uranium and nuclear power.
Absolutely. Now, if people want to follow what's going on, I assume they would go to Uranium Producers website, which would be?
Yeah, well, uraniumenergy.com is our website, uraniumroyalty.com on the royalty side. If you want to know kind of where nuclear power is going globally, I would encourage you to go to the World Nuclear Association out of the UK, or the Nuclear Energy Institute, NEI.org in the US, which can really give you a wealth of information on small modular reactors and reactor growth and some of the challenges and successes that the industry's experiencing right now.
Wonderful. Thanks again for joining me, and I look forward to seeing how everything strings out in the future.
Excellent. Thanks, Michael.